Welcome to the Sunrise Podcast, powered by Sunrise Labs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Sunrise Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. On the podcast today, we're going to be discussing outsourcing product development and the potential pitfalls and also the keys to doing it effectively. And joining me to talk about this is Laurin Noel, the VP of Business Development at Sunrise Labs. Laurin, thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Tyler. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So after 27 years of being in business and hundreds of projects delivered, Sunrise has a lot of experience in this area, right? So with that, I'm sure comes some wisdom on best practices. Is that right?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we really pride ourselves on as an organization is continuous improvement. And so we really take that to heart. It's, of course, part of what comes with the ISO certification that we work under, which is the ISO 13485, important really for medical product development. But as part of that, really continuous improvement. So always looking at what are we doing in the way we work with clients? How can we do that work more efficiently, more effectively? Are there things that we need to think about to make sure we're delivering the best services we can to meet our client needs?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about kind of delivering that exceptional service, delivering the right product for what your customers want, I would imagine that getting off on the right foot and having everyone on the same page is huge to the success of a project overall. So what do those initial conversations and communications look like when you first receive a new project and you're trying to get off on that right foot?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tyler, because it's something we talk about a lot here at Sunrise. I think there's a couple things that we look at. One of them certainly is trying to look at the nature of the project and make sure the process that we're thinking about for product development is a good fit. There's a wide variety of projects that we see here in terms of the technical challenges as well as the business challenges that our clients are trying to meet. So we look at, for instance, is it a program with a fairly well understood technology, fairly well understood path to get from the entry point to the completed product, whatever that may mean for the client. In that case, a traditional waterfall type product development process probably is a good choice. We, however, see quite a few programs come in where there's a lot of TBDs, things really still needing to be understood, things needing to be better defined to be able to lay a solid foundation to build the product development program around. In those types of projects, we most typically would recommend a much more agile, iterative type of approach to the clients for how we'd like to manage their project. There's certainly pros and cons to both of those, but I think that's a key difference in terms of thinking about the nature of the project, what you're trying to achieve, again, on the project, both in the technology and the business, and think about what really will work best to meet those project needs.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think kind of just as you're saying that, what came up in my mind was that I'm sure on some level, every project is slightly different, right? So how do you approach each project as its own unique thing while also not reinventing the wheel every time, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because of the number of projects that we've done through the years, is a lot of both knowledge that our team has developed around developing medical products in general, and then specifically a lot of the challenges of particular segments where we specialize, for instance, in cardiovascular, robotic surgeries. There's a lot of areas of specialization that our team has very deep experience. And I think that being able to leverage some of that experience is always interesting to our clients and valuable to the program to be able to help reduce risk, because anytime that you're starting with something that's reasonably well understood or perhaps even developed and tested as a module or an aspect of a program, that reduces program risk. And anytime you reduce program risk, you're also reducing schedule and budget risk. So those are the kind of things clients like to hear. And one of the things that I think we really bring to product development, because of the years of experience that the company has been doing product development, as well as the breadth and depth of the engineering capabilities on our team here at Sunrise, really we have a very experienced team, and I think it's really looking at the makeup of the team that you need to apply to a project, and whether it's Sunrise or another design firm. I mean, this a lot of these principles certainly apply as product development in general across many different types of projects, but also working with many different design firms. I think those principles still hold true.
That's a great point, what you mentioned there about team members, because having the right team, having the right members of a team really makes a huge difference as well, right? So it's important to make sure that you have those team members that can carry out a project. So those years of experience when it comes to the engineering and the things that you need to really completely fulfill what a client is looking for.
Right. There's one thing that we've seen in some projects, and a tip I'd also like to share with the audience, is around the nature of the project. We talked about projects that are pretty well defined versus those with a lot of TBDs. The other aspect of that is the nature of the engagement that a client might be considering. We see many cases where the client has a lot of in-house resources to bring to bear to a program. So they're not necessarily looking to outsource the complete development effort, but they're looking for a partner who can really bolster those areas of either technical knowledge or experience that they may not have or may be shorthanded on internally. So what we've sometimes seen is in those cases where there's going to be a division of responsibility and shared responsibility really in executing on that product development program, is looking to understand who at the client company would be tasked with coordinating that effort. We like to think of that individual most typically as a system engineer. And in that system engineering role, really having somebody who's both technical and of a seniority and experience level, that they're in a position to help drive and make those trade-off decisions between different modules or different aspects of the program as they come together, because there's ultimately going to always be trade-offs in those product development programs. So having that technical resource on the client side in those situations is really critical. Certainly we can apply system engineering to a program, and that often works best when we're also responsible for the overall program development. But again, it's a point to really just look at who that individual is, whether they're on the client side or the outsourced design team side, and understand really the roles and responsibilities well as you really start to think about the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're talking about that, it strikes me just that communication and collaboration is really, really important, just having that person and having that relationship with them to be able to go back and forth on a project. And it feels like, communication is obviously so vital, but not all communication is created equal, right? There's communication that's obviously going to be better than others. So what makes positive communication between two groups that are trying to collaborate on a project rather than just noise? What is effective communication, I suppose, is really the heart of my question.
Oh, yeah. No, communication is so key. That's something we talk about a lot here. I think it really starts with setting expectations. We talked a little bit about expectations, but one of the ways that we try to capture those expectations at Sunrise and to make sure that everybody is on the same page with regard to roles and responsibilities as you start a program is using something called the RACI model, which is a method to really identify roles and responsibilities. And you can do that down a full task list to identify who's going to need to be informed of decisions, who's really responsible for those decisions, who might be consulted on those decisions, and who needs to approve those decisions. Not necessarily in those orders, but those are really what make up a RACI model. And going through that whole process of defining who's really responsible for those different aspects, I think is important for the program from the beginning, and then revisiting that, really not just saying, okay, that's it, and we move forward. I think just doing a little bit of a check on that through the course of a program, making sure that nothing has changed in terms of how the work is being done, And the other big thing there is certainly trying to make sure from an early stage of the program that you understand who the key stakeholders are in the program. There's often many different voices that influence a product through its life cycle. So certainly understanding, again, from the marketing perspective, the technical team, the manufacturing team, the sales team in terms of that field experience, and certainly, of course, the executive team in a company, because there's often different and sometimes conflicting interests across those individuals. So really making sure you understand at an early stage of the program who those stakeholders are, what's important to them, and really trying to balance what sometimes can be conflicting needs or expectations. And then, the other thing about effective communication that we talk about a lot here is utilizing what we call, and which again is known, and this is something that has been written about, is assumption of positive intent. And assumption of positive intent is really a way of thinking and something that we practice here at Sunrise. And I say practice because it takes work. It takes reminding yourself that you need to approach a problem or an issue with an assumption of positive intent. And it basically is seeing an issue that perhaps you don't understand why someone has taken actions, or you really are struggling to imagine why the decision that was made is the right decision. It's about going to that individual that is making that statement or making that decision with an assumption of positive intent, which means that you approach it expecting that they did so for the right reasons and with good rationale. And so really approaching it that way and asking them about what that decision process was. It keeps the communication really at a much more positive interaction and level and helps to really, in our experience, reduce conflicts and defensiveness, which can occur in situations where people have different viewpoints, by really opening up a conversation about an understanding of the process that somebody may have made a decision on, which perhaps you don't agree with at the outset, but hopefully you may align through those conversations. Actually, our president talks a lot about an individual he knows and holds in high esteem, and has that individual on his wrist has tattooed the words, "I may be wrong," because I think, again, it's keeping that open mind, not approaching a situation thinking you're right and your way is the only way, but having that open mind is really important for how we work here.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because I did a podcast with your president, Eric Soderberg, back, I think, in the spring, where we just talked about the company culture, there at Sunrise Labs, and it's fantastic to see that that's not just an internal thing, but that also shapes and guides and directs how you interact with outside clients as well. I guess it's a 360-degree view of how to do business and how to treat others. It's just that it's assumption of positive intent, like you mentioned, and that's really, really good to hear.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it does also tie very directly into the whole product development process. So, for instance, we had a situation where a client, very big medical device company, very, very knowledgeable and experienced team, had done some great work. They'd set the requirements for the product. They had developed an architecture. They had selected certain technology choices, and they asked us to come in and review those choices. So in looking at those areas that we would have done differently, it was interesting because here's a client that has done great work and asking us to review this information, but frankly, I think not necessarily expecting that we would disagree with the choices they made, but I think it was through some really interesting dialogue and meetings to say, we want to understand why you were thinking about that particular software architecture or those particular technology choices that you have chosen. And through that discussion, gaining their perspective, and then also being able to share with them, here are some things we would suggest you consider, because our team has done so much work with such a wide range of technologies through so many years that our exposure is much broader than often many of our clients who, again, very bright, very knowledgeable about product development and very knowledgeable about their products, but they just don't have necessarily the same experience to stay up to date with emerging and evolving technologies, and specifically not having that hands-on experience on working with some of those different technologies, which has been helpful. But it's really approaching even those situations with an assumption that there were good reasons they chose those choices. Let's talk about those and then share some thoughts and see if there's other things that might be worth considering.
Yeah, I really like that approach, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. So one of the things that I'm wondering now is, so if a company is listening to this and they are thinking through, okay, should we work with an outside team on product development or not? What are some of the benefits to working with an outside team when it comes to product development? Can you walk me through some of those? Sure.
Yeah, I think that one of the key things certainly is the opportunity to take advantage of knowledge that your in-house team may not have, and also potentially to accelerate schedules. Our clients, for instance, we're doing a lot of work these days in wireless connectivity, a lot of Bluetooth low energy based wireless designs. And on the surface, I think everybody thinks, oh yeah, you just buy a Bluetooth module and drop that in. But in fact, there's a tremendous amount to that in terms of the requirements, in terms of Bluetooth technology implementation and design. And having had that experience, I think that's an area we could help accelerate working with clients in collaboration if they have that as part of their design, as well as, that certainly extends across many other areas, motors, motor controls, miniaturization. There's a lot of hot topic areas that clients often are really looking for somebody that's been there, done that, had that experience to be able to help accelerate their program. The one thing that we really caution potential clients is to not necessarily, and hopefully to not come in with the idea that they're just going to be able to put that whole project on our plate and walk away. Most clients do, but I'm surprised that sometimes there are clients that, they're considering outsourcing for a pretty common reason. They're way too busy. They can't get to this themselves, but yet it's a really important program. But too often, they don't think about allocating some time to be able to support their outside team, a team like Sunrise. And that can lead to delays, which again can impact both schedule and budget. So I think that's one of the things that clients should consider if they're considering outsourcing, to make sure they do have some bandwidth, enough of the right bandwidth relative to what they're trying to outsource, to make sure they can keep their outsource partner effective and working efficiently.
Yeah, I think that's a good word of, I guess, caution almost, just so that people are aware of that is the case, right? That there is going to be time that needs to be dedicated to making sure that the project is going the way that they would like for it to go, right? And so I think that that's a good word of caution. Are there any other potential pitfalls that you've experienced, that you've seen over the years, that people should be aware of when they enter into an outside product development team relationship? Are there any of those other pitfalls that people should be aware of or look out for?
There are. I think one of the things we hear about a lot, and I think a lot of clients are getting more and more savvy about outsourcing, and I'm happy for that, because I see more and more clients asking some of these really important questions. And if they're not asking these questions, I try to encourage them to think about them as part of the process of looking at outsourcing and the type of partner that they choose. But, what is the makeup of the team that will actually work on your project? I think certainly it's hard for a company like Sunrise to necessarily guarantee from an early stage. I mean, clients will come to us and say, if I do this project in 6 months, who's going to be the team that you'll put on it? Well, a lot can change in 6 months. We're lucky to have very low turnover, so likely all the same people will be here, but it's a matter of matching up the right team to the project and looking at that relative to their schedule. But really, understanding who those team members are and who is likely to be at least the key team members that will be assigned to your team, that I think is really important. And then also understanding how the project is being estimated. I think that our team tends to put a lot of work and a lot of thought into developing an estimate for a project, and tend to be fairly comprehensive and thorough in terms of how we think about product development. And unfortunately, we've seen cases where other firms just really don't understand what will be needed for aspects of the design. For instance, everything from very early gaining the appropriate user input through the whole process of verifying and validation of software and other design aspects. And we really encourage clients to try to think about that product development in a pretty holistic way. Again, whether or not we're personally responsible for it, I think it's important that they try to have a reasonable understanding of what it's really going to take. Certainly most of the large medical product companies that we work with have a good sense of that. They've developed a lot of products. It's some of the startup companies that we talk to, and we really try to educate, because we really don't want to see somebody just spending money on something that they can't develop and fund based on, unfortunately, sometimes a mistaken expectation of the money it will take to do so. So I think, trying to share that realistic expectation of what it's going to take for product development. And then also, manufacturing ramp and marketing. I think sometimes companies, particularly startups, get really excited about the product development, but they don't necessarily think through the whole process of, okay, so, what's my sales and distribution channel? And hopefully they've thought before, at the very earliest stages of product development, who's going to buy this? What are they going to pay for it? And what's important to those potential customers, because that again is part of the foundation. But I'm sometimes surprised at some of the products and projects that I see that it seems that really haven't given enough attention to those kind of questions until quite late in the development project. And as I mentioned earlier, the later you start to think about those things and perhaps need to change course because of new information, the more impactful those changes will be to project cost, time, and potentially features. If a client has been working on a program that they need to change course midstream, sometimes, unfortunately, it's a matter of having to cut back on features to be able to still get to market with a less fully functional project, because they hadn't put the time in up front to really understand the priorities and what it's going to take to get through that.
Wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And boy, this podcast has just a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom behind it when it comes to outsourcing product development. So Laurin Noel, VP of Business Development at Sunrise Labs, thank you so much for joining me today here on the Sunrise Podcast and sharing a little bit more about this.
My great pleasure, Tyler. Thank you so much for having me and for the insightful questions.
And thank you, everybody, so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. Be sure to go subscribe on iTunes or Spotify to get the latest episodes downloaded directly to your device. And we're going to be back soon with another episode of the Sunrise Podcast. But until then, I've been your host, Tyler Kern. Thank you so much for listening.